Hello everyone. Today we bring you a story about a group of nuns who are unexpectedly drawn to love and desire. Their lives take an interesting turn when a young man enters their convent, and his presence sparks intrigue among them. The story begins during a time when a devastating plague is spreading across the land. We are introduced to Tandira, a painter working in a church. Tandira has not been paid for his work in a long time, so he goes to the priest to demand his wages, only to discover that the priest has passed away. Seizing the opportunity, Tandira decides to disguise himself as the new priest by wearing the priest's robes. Meanwhile, we meet Lorenzo, a young man being pursued by men after stealing money from Jonathan, a powerful government official. Jonathan is determined to exact revenge, but Lorenzo manages to narrowly escape. In another part of the story, we are introduced to Pampa, the daughter of a wealthy merchant. When her father dies from the plague, Jonathan visits her to offer his condolences. However, his gesture comes with a condition. He expects a personal favor in return. Pampa tells him she is already engaged to the Prince of Russia, who is soon to arrive. Jonathan then reveals that her father owed him a large debt, which he had paid off. As part of the agreement, her father had promised her hand in marriage to Jonathan. Despite this, Pampa insists she will keep her commitment to the prince. Elsewhere, Lorenzo is on horseback, fleeing from Jonathan's soldiers. Along the way, he encounters a man pushing a cart carrying a dead body. Curious, Lorenzo asks the man about the road ahead. The man explains that it leads to a convent filled with nuns and mentions that the body belongs to a deceased gardener. Lorenzo wonders if he might find work as a gardener there. However, the man points out that Lorenzo doesn't meet the requirements, as the previous gardener was both deaf and mute, qualities specifically desired for the position. Lorenzo jokingly remarks that being deaf and mute is hardly a unique qualification. As Lorenzo continues his escape, he climbs a tree to hide from the pursuing soldiers. Though they fail to spot him, the branch he is perched on eventually breaks, and Lorenzo falls to the ground, losing consciousness. Some time later, a group of nuns discovers Lorenzo and brings him back to their convent. Two of the nuns check on him, appearing fascinated by his presence, as if they haven't seen a man in years. One nun comments on whether he has suffered any injuries, but seems to hint at other interests. They begin to touch him, lifting his shirt and kissing his stomach. The experience leaves one nun entranced, prompting her to encourage the other to do the same. The second nun follows suit, also kissing him. Unbeknownst to them, Lorenzo is conscious but pretends to remain unconscious. When one of the nuns finally kisses him on the lips, Lorenzo suddenly opens his eyes, startling both women. At that moment, the Mother Superior arrives, and the nuns quickly cover their faces, explaining that they believe the man is both mute and deaf. The Mother Superior is pleased, thinking a mute and deaf man would be an ideal secret lover, as he could never reveal anything. She asks Lorenzo if he is indeed mute and deaf, and Lorenzo nods, pretending to confirm it. The Mother Superior then instructs the two nuns to bathe him. During the bath, the nuns engage in playful behavior with Lorenzo. Meanwhile, Pampa, troubled by Jonathan's pursuit, visits the church with her friends. The women are all virgins, and Pampa confides in them about Jonathan's intentions to marry her, even though her marriage is already arranged with Prince Mark. She expresses her desire to marry Mark instead. One friend suggests she should see Prince Mark first, while another warns that taking someone else's fiancé before marriage is wrong. At that moment, Jonathan arrives and reminds them of the ongoing lockdown. To keep Pampa safe, they decide to send her to a convent until Prince Mark arrives. Pampa and her friends travel in separate carriages, with one disguised as a priest escorting them. When Pampa reaches the convent, she is stripped of her dress and given the attire of a nun. She assumes that her virtue will remain safe in the convent, unaware that secret passageways are being dug beneath the grounds. Soon, Pampa notices Lorenzo and asks the nuns about him. They explain that he is the gardener and that he works diligently. Intrigued, Pampa begins to feel an attraction toward him. Later, while Lorenzo is working in the garden, a nun who seems different from the others calls him aside. The two share a romantic moment behind a tree, which Pampa witnesses. Seeing this fills her with jealousy. Meanwhile, Prince Mark arrives at the palace and meets Jonathan. During their conversation, Prince Mark mistakenly assumes Jonathan is Pampa's father and mentions bringing a gift for him and his wife. Jonathan clarifies that he is not her father, and Mark jokingly suggests he might be her grandfather. Jonathan corrects him, declaring that he is Pampa's future husband. Amused, Prince Mark leaves. On his way, he encounters a man who informs him that Pampa is staying at a convent and waiting to marry him. Hearing this, Mark heads toward the convent. At the convent, two nuns visit Lorenzo's room and engage in flirtatious conversation. They begin undressing. Meanwhile, other nuns prepare to bathe Lorenzo. One nun tells Pampa that she plans to show Lorenzo the secret passageway that day, but Pampa protests, calling it sinful. The nuns accuse Pampa of being jealous, but they insist they will still spend time with Lorenzo. Their plans, however, are interrupted. They prepare Lorenzo's bath and invite Pampa to join them, but she refuses. Later, after Lorenzo is ready, the Mother Superior takes him to meet her superior. During this meeting, the Mother Superior expresses affection toward Lorenzo. Pampa, watching from a distance, feels intense jealousy as her feelings for Lorenzo deepen. The next day, while Lorenzo is working in the garden, Pampa sits nearby reading a book. Lorenzo glances at her, lost in thought. Shortly after, Pampa visits Lorenzo's room. Lorenzo quickly realizes the reason for her visit. As he begins to remove her veil, Pampa stops him, blindfolds him instead, and declares that she wants to marry him. Then she kisses him. Later, a carriage arrives at the convent to take Pampa away because Prince Mark has arrived. However, Pampa, unwilling to leave Lorenzo, tells the Mother Superior that Lorenzo is neither mute nor deaf. The Mother Superior asks how she knows this, and Pampa explains that she heard him singing in the garden. To confirm, the Mother Superior approaches Lorenzo and whispers in his ear, "Your ear is cut." Startled, Lorenzo shouts in surprise. Realizing he has been exposed, Lorenzo quickly pretends it is a miracle that he can now speak and hear. The Mother Superior, unimpressed, expels him from the convent. As Pampa prepares to leave the convent, Lorenzo begs her to take him along. The two depart together. Meanwhile, Prince Mark stops by a pond for water and sees a beautiful woman bathing. Intrigued, he asks, "Are you human?" The woman replies, "I am a mermaid." Mark confesses his love for a girl named Pampa. The woman then reveals that she is Pampa, marking the beginning of Mark's love story. Meanwhile, Pampa and Lorenzo arrive at a church. Pampa asks Lorenzo if he loves someone, and he replies, "Yes, but I haven't seen her face yet. She kissed me once." Pampa then asks Lorenzo to close his eyes and try to remember if she is the girl he wants to kiss. As they lean in for a kiss, Jonathan suddenly appears. Pampa urges Lorenzo to flee, but Lorenzo decides to stay and face Jonathan. Jonathan attacks Lorenzo and beats him severely. As Jonathan is about to kill him, Pampa intervenes, declaring that she will never marry Jonathan if he harms Lorenzo. Reluctantly, Jonathan spares Lorenzo but has him imprisoned. A few days later, Pampa tells Jonathan she will marry him only if he frees Lorenzo. Furious but determined to marry her, Jonathan agrees. However, Pampa has no intention of marrying him and uses this as a ploy to save Lorenzo. Pampa secretly meets a fake priest and explains the situation. The priest agrees to help her. Meanwhile, Jonathan orders two soldiers to take Lorenzo far away, but Lorenzo outsmarts them and heads back to find Pampa. On the day of Jonathan's wedding, the fake priest deliberately delays the ceremony by asking ridiculous questions. He eventually demands that Jonathan show his hands. When Jonathan complies, the priest comments on how dirty they are and insists he wash them. Furious, Jonathan washes his hands and returns, only to threaten the priest with a sword. At that moment, Prince Mark arrives with Lorenzo. Together, they confront Jonathan and overpower him. Jonathan attempts to flee, but Lorenzo fights him and eventually pushes him into a well. Pampa then approaches Prince Mark and tells him she cannot marry him. Mark is shocked. When Pampa reveals her face, Mark says, "You are not the Pampa I met at the pond." Just then, another Pampa appears, revealing the mix-up. As the chaos settles, Lorenzo begins to walk away. Pampa stops him, asking, "Where are you going?" He replies, "I am going to find the girl who kissed me, and I will marry her." Pampa asks him to close his eyes and then kisses him. Lorenzo immediately recognizes her as the one he has been searching for.